Hello and welcome to Why Are We Talking About Rabbits? That's this podcast. And rabbits are things that reproduce really quickly, like on social media or in the news, and they're really, well, they're not very valuable except for those people who are making them so that you might give them their money. Why are we talking about rabbits? We're not. We're talking about heavy things lightly. Theology, history, deeply immersive years spent overseas. That's how we get to figure out and make sense of what's going on today. Today on WAWTAR, we visit with Roifield Brown. I will call him an all-around historical media presence from the UK. And today on episode 35, we talk about politics and the notion of being black. So let's talk. How you doing? First of all, just tell me, what country do you call home right now? Like, what is this to you? This place called America.
I am the original digital nomad. I started reading articles just last year that people like me have a name. And it's digital nomad. So I have a British passport, but I spend by far the least amount of my time there out of 3 countries. So I do 6 months of the year in the United States. And emotionally, I call that home now, though legally I'm not a resident. And then I have 2 kids that live in Toronto. So I go there for at least 3 months of the year on average. And then the other 2 to 3 months, I'm in the UK. Generally, I'm in the UK in the summertime to see my folks and my 3rd child who lives in London. So, yeah, I'm a hobo. I'm a hobo.
I have been for 2 parts of my life a hobo, so I get it. I think I'm back into hobo life a little bit right now. So, so I'm gonna read what I know to be your background, but then you're going to add to me because I want my folks on WAWTAR to know who we're talking to, because we're really blessed to have you here and to talk about some pretty cool ideas, I hope. So as I understand it, you the founder of lots of things, but one of the things is myvillage.com. You produce pop promos, radio shows, direct live TV, owned a couple clothing shops. From time to time, you're a contributor to Huffington Post. You've got 7 podcasts in production right now. You've worked on over 600 podcasts. Is that right?
It's got to be in that number, yeah.
Yeah. 31 countries on your visitation list. You've been a lot of places. And I was just listening to 10 American Presidents, which I know you were working on for a while. And then I loved How Jamaica Conquered the World. That's from more than a couple of years ago, but I love that. And that'll come up today, I think, a little bit. And you're a producer and you love Roman history, the history of Rome. Is that right?
Yeah, for me, I put it down to, I adore history. And if anything, I would say I'm a student of history, would be the title I'd give myself. And I kind of put it down to being an only child who has a brother, but there was 13 years before my little baby brother was born.
Oh, wow.
And I always remember as a little kid being fascinated by looking at the globe. We'd always go around to some old aunt's house and they'd have a globe. And this was the 1970s when children were supposed to be seen and not heard. So I'd be there sat silently whilst the old people were talking about whatever. And I just remember staring at globes all the time and being fascinated by why countries were the shape that they were, which kind of led me into history. Why is it that Canada and America have this big straight line, whereas all the other countries have these wiggly lines? And geopolitics and current affairs. At the age of my first memory of the news was the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, and I knew that was significant. So when everybody else was playing with their Action Man or the GI Joe, I was riveted to the news because history was happening in front of me.
And you could recognize even as a younger person that history had some relevance to you.
Yeah, but it was, for me, it was, why was Russia so big? Why was China so big and all the other countries so small? And then from another perspective as well, looking at a British-centric globe, the ex-British colonies were always red or pink. So, why was it that, India and Australia were always the same color, and Canada, etc. And trying to figure all this out. But also, having West Indian parents in the UK meant that you're always taught about your culture. And that invariably is looking backwards, as well as knowing who you are at that moment, So, yeah.
Tell me what they taught you about who you were growing up in England. That's interesting, I think.
If I had £1 for every time my mother said, you're going to have to work harder than your white friends. So I grew up in a majority white neighborhood. Okay. Like when I went to school, I was only one of 2 black kids in my class out of 30. And that was probably pretty standard for the whole school. And the UK has never had formal segregation like the US. Mm-hmm. But one of the big differences between our pattern of migration, non-white migration into the UK, is it fundamentally really only started in 1948. So there isn't the generations upon generations of segregation, etc., like there has been in the United States. But my parents always said to me, you're going to have to work twice as hard as your white friends to achieve what they're going to achieve. Mm. There are going to be impediments in your way, witting or unwitting impediments that people will put there because you are different. Also, it's the 1970s, so it was also a time of kind of like black pride in, let's say, African history. So my parents would have, kind of African carvings in the house. We were taught that the world was our oyster and that we'd been an oppressed people. My parents were from Jamaica, which only got independence in 1962 from the British. So there's a sense of optimism about the future, but a sense of realism as to our situation right now, and a rediscovering of black pride and history, and the fact that in all the history books that I'd look at school just wasn't there,
So I think I mentioned to you, I married a black woman as a pretty white suburban dude. So a lot of the themes you're saying are similar. So here's the question to pick up what you were talking about. When you're in the States around black folks here, is there a sense of unity? Because in New York City, where we're from, there's always a division with West Indian kids and Black American kids. Can you feel this in terms of as we search, or as you search for identity, or what is that relationship between the West Indian kids and African American kids in the States?
So I can't speak to what you're saying because I didn't grow up here. I've only been coming here for 7 years. However, I know it historically to have been true. Right. And I've documented that. But from a British perspective, a black British perspective, there is a difference between our two countries, which is subtle in one way and profound in another. And the example I always tell everybody is General Colin Powell, who, funny enough, is a Jamaican American, not an African American.
Yeah.
Every black British person, and arguably every British person, but I'm going to say black British because I'm on safer ground there, was surprised in 1991 to see the leader of the American Armed Forces was non-white. That was a shock. Like when the news came on that America was about to invade Iraq, all us black Brits went, "What?" We looked at each other, "What?" Right? That was profound, right? And remember I said that black folks have been in England since, you can read books that, you know, there's skeletons of African monks found in Norwich Abbeys from the 14th century, but this is like one or two people. Mm-hmm. In any significant numbers, it's only been since 1948. So we don't have the institutional legacy of being here. So the difference is, if you're going to be the head of the British Armed Forces, you're going to have to have gone to Sandhurst, which North Point is your equivalent to Sandhurst. And a lot of the families, a lot of the people that graduate from Sandhurst are going to be from military families, going to be part of the British establishment. We haven't got the legacy of being part of the British establishment of that type. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to see the head of the British Armed Forces being black anytime soon. Doesn't matter how egalitarian politically the country actually is. It's not going to happen because you need to have gone to Sandhurst, and there are established families that send their kids to Sandhurst and have done for hundreds of years.
It's a pipeline of sorts.
Exactly. So you can look at so we looked at America and went, oh my gosh, right.
How did he get into the pipeline?
and this is the thing. Colin Powell didn't go to North Point. West Point, sorry. Didn't go to West Point. Right. He didn't go, right? When I interviewed him, I was shocked. So you can circumnavigate that in the US. But then if I look at acceptance of black culture in the UK on the ground to do with working class whites, I would say it's the embrace has been more all encompassing and less of a worry than it appears to be in some bits of the United States. Can't say all, but in some bits.
You're talking about popular black culture.
Popular black culture. There's not the existential threat that some bits of the American establishment have to black American culture. Mm-hmm. It's much less now, but still there is in some aspects, some areas of American society, there seems to be a worry, but it's diminishing. I'm mm-hmm. getting this in proportion, right? It's less so in the United Kingdom. Also, economically, so I spend, a lot of time in Oakland. I can walk into black-owned middle-class businesses ad nauseum. There isn't the same amount of those black-owned middle-class businesses in the United Kingdom. And if there are, then they are catering to a black audience.
I see.
Key difference. You can walk into a business in Oakland and it's just a business that just happens to be owned by somebody who's African American. If that business exists in the UK, invariably it's catering to a black audience. Key difference. However, again, and every black person who's traveled will tell you what I'm about to say, the amount of black destitution that there is in California, Northern California, is utterly shocking, and you don't see that in the UK. So it seems like the economic spectrum is pulled wider mm-hmm. in the United Kingdom.
Let me go back, because you said something that's really relevant to this show when we were talking about identity. So one of the sort of the formulation of the show is that there is this new world. And if you look historically, and you're a historian, you'll know, obviously, a lot of people don't. There's this revolution of the 1600s, right, and through the 1700s, the Enlightenment. And I call those folks on the show the light people. And I do it on purpose because the light people become the white people. But it's a movement of ideas and identity. So one of the identities I'm always interested in is a new world, old world identity, a pre-enlightenment and a post-enlightenment. And here's my question, because you were touching on it and I feel it in my own experience. When someone, my girls, for example, my wife is Black American, I'm white. When they're trying to figure out who they are, what we've always taught them is to identify in terms of their relationship to the transcendent or the divine. So their first movement toward identity, all of our vocabulary is about God, which is very old world way to identify who you are. You know, the old world always came through the father or the name or the language. It was always about who's your father. I lived in Bambara, in Mali in West Africa, and it was always, who's your father? Always. What's your last name? And that always implied something about the father, the big father. You know, you've come from that place. How do you understand what you are first and foremost?
As Black folks in the Western world, so that is whether France, which has a significant Black population, small but significant, the UK, the Caribbean, and all of the New World, Canada, America, etc. We unfortunately define ourselves by the last 500 years.
Right.
By being the sons and daughters of slaves. And we look at our achievements through that light, and that's sad. You know, it's Black History Month here in the United States, and I dislike Black History Month. Dislike it profoundly, because what we're doing is ghettoizing ourselves by saying that for the other 11 months of the year, our history is marginalized. But yay, this is our month. In the United Kingdom, it's October. I don't know why it's different, but it just is.
That's interesting.
And I am bored and fed up by Martin Luther King. Was a wonderful man, a great leader, fantastic orator, and the only American hero that white America will accept as a hero, some still begrudgingly, who pointed out the flaws of America at the time.
So that's interesting. Is that grind you a little bit? Is it because he's accepted by a majority, by white folks, that it's like, uh-oh, wait a minute.
No, not at all. Not at all. Right. But he's a much easier character for, if you believe in the American system as told in traditional history books, he's a much easier character for you to accept than, let's say, Malcolm X. But that's not my point. My point is that African Americans, Black people, had a history, and a rich history, pre-slavery.
That's right, yeah.
And pre-colonialization in Africa. So for all of these African American professors and scholars, you know, and it's great to talk about Frederick Douglass, etc. But what about Mansa Musa? You know, he was that rich that he literally bankrupted Cairo when he went there on Hajj. He
gave out too much gold.
Yeah, too much gold. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, how many African Americans who would tell you that they're proud African Americans are even aware that this man existed?
Well, this brings me to Ethiopia, where we did some work and I lived for a little while. And I feel like that's what the Rastas are doing, right? So this is... So I'm an Orthodox Christian, and Ethiopians are Orthodox. And there's some differences there, but in the way that I practice liturgy and they do. And we can get into them. They're pretty fine, but they're important. In the end, though, I always am marveled, especially with white folks, I live in the South, who don't realize that Christianity predates anything they even think of in terms of Protestant Christianity by over 1,000 years. Maybe the second oldest Christian country in the world. I think the Rastas are doing something, reaching into the past, into the old world, to make sense of their new world experience.
Again, the answer to all of your questions, ultimately, if it doesn't end up with Jamaica, passes through Jamaica. You do know that, don't you?
Oh, I want to hear about that. Educate me. That's excellent. I love Jamaica, though. I hope so, but how?
One of the first real, if you're part of the American white establishment, the first black true anti-hero, right, who rejected the American economic system, was Marcus Garvey, who was a Jamaican. So you had Frederick Douglass, you had these great intellectual figures beforehand. But they wanted African Americans, Black Americans, to take their place around the American table. Marcus Garvey just says, in the early 20th century, forget all that.
Yeah,
we're gonna take what is ours, and then we're gonna remove ourselves.
Yeah,
and he is a Jamaican immigrant to New York. Now, this is a time of, in hindsight, it was the age of colonialization, and imperialism is actually on the wane. But people in the 1910s and 1920s didn't realize that at the time. In hindsight, we now know that. So what he did was to say to African Americans, not only do we need to go back to Africa, which would have been a place where every history book would have just laughed at, shunned. It was colonized by all these European powers. But he said, we need to look at great African nations, and there is one which is not being colonized, and that happened to be Ethiopia.
Right.
And it just happens to also be as you said, the second oldest Christian country in the world after Armenia. Armenia comes first and Ethiopia is second.
Yeah, the Georgians might fight you on that a little bit, but yeah, it's right there. They're all right there.
and Ethiopia has this long, continuous line of heritage from antiquity. So much so that in the Middle Ages, there's all these myths of a great Christian kingdom in Africa, and it was always ruled by somebody called Prester John. That is Ethiopia.
That's right.
Right.
That's exactly right.
So, and then you look at these rock-hewn churches that they built in the mountains, and it boggles the mind. It subverts our whole notion from a white Western view of civilization in Africa, because this predates the United Kingdom being a country, England being a country, Ethiopia's older, and continuous line. And he says we need to look back. And in 1930, there's this new leader, emperor of Ethiopia called Haile Selassie. He is the Ras of Tafari. The Ras means leader, and Tafari is this area, because it is an empire. It's a polyglot empire of various kingdoms. Now, through a transmutation of ideas and time, this movement starts in Jamaica to revere the Ras of Tafari, and they have a very, in the 1930s, I can only imagine what those guys went through, because by the time I was a kid in the 1970s in Britain, my parents still said Rastas.
They did, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they were like,
right.
They're kind of weird, they're subversive, etc.
They're rebellious, but in this kind of passive, peaceful weed kind of way. Yeah, I know.
Exactly. It's like, we're going to take a step out of your construct of society.
Yeah, that's right.
And economics. We don't sign up for that, right?
Yeah. Babylon. Yeah. We're not joining Babylon.
Exactly. And so many of their references are from the Old Testament,
Mm-hmm.
from the old bit of the Bible, from the Torah. And of course, the Babylonians enslaved the people of Israel some 500 years before Jesus and whatever. So the Babylonian system is one of oppression.
That's right.
And it has this biblical reference. So you can only imagine if you're in the 1930s, you're going to wear your hair in dreadlocks. You're going to invert language the way that Rastas do. That people just thought these people were crazy. And I'll tell you what, just to slightly leap. I went to Israel a few years back, and it was amazing actually to realize if you're in Israel and you are, and to me, if you're in Israel and you meet an Israeli Rasta, that is a massive squaring of the circle somehow. And you go, wait on a minute, right? But there are quite a few of them there. A lot of white ones, a few black ones.
How about that?
Ethiopian descent. And it actually blows your mind, right? There's this Jamaican sect of Christianity, which is actually quietly spread all around the world, which in some aspects, their great totem, which is dreadlocks, is now a countercultural totem.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody wears dreadlocks, they could be at a G7 summit, but on the outside protesting against your Babylonian system. But the one use the word Babylonian, but against the economic system which is oppressing people.
That's right.
They're countercultural. And whether that person is actually a Rasta or not, they take some level of spiritual lineage from Ethiopia, which then takes it from Israel, from the people of Israel, going back over 2,000 years. And that's what I love about history.
So this Rasta phrase, I and I. So I did some work on it, but this was actually a guy, a Rasta friend of mine, who was telling me this. And the I and I comes out of God and man, and Rastafari was God and emperor, and man is God and man. So you are God and man, I and I. It's a unity of three. And what it is, it's the unity of you as emperor, you as God, and you as human. All of this comes right out of the theological lineage of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is borrowing it from the Jewish tradition, right? And so it's super fascinating when you start to talk to a Rasta. And what happened to me is I started listening to Natty King in like 2006 or something, and I'm barely understanding anything. And then John Mason, and I sort of got to guys that I could understand because of the patois. And as an Orthodox Christian, I started to hear all the constructs of Orthodox theology in the language. Now, it wasn't exactly the same language by any means, but it was all the same historical edges and all the same historical contours of what I'm taught as an old world Orthodox Christian, which is you're not of this world, you're of something bigger. You're not to, your goal is not to try to change the world, just try to change your soul. And when you hear all that in the real Rastas, I started digging around, and I'm like, this makes a ton of sense. And again, it's that old world. So you mentioned earlier, so you're a liberal in the sense of politics. What are you willing? So if we took the Western world, the enlightened world, whatever that is, the light people world since the rational revolution, as a liberal, are you working to extend that world of reason and the philosophers like Locke and Hume and these cats who tried to lay down a rational world so that we could all live in it, and utilitarian sort of outlook on doing the best for the most amount of people? Are you trying to extend that world? Or as a liberal from the UK, are you trying to reorient the world that we call modern? Are you excited about postmodern stuff where everything just sort of splinters? Or are you trying to put it back together as a liberal? Like, what's the goal?
One of the biggest problems that our society faces now, and this is global, right, is splintering. It is silos. It is people speaking to others that confirm our own biases already.
Yeah.
Okay. It is great that we have streaming platforms. Great. All right. I'm on about Netflix, let's say. And while Netflix isn't the root of the problem of the fact that 20% of Americans are diehard Trump supporters, right? But it's a symptom of the same thing, right? So this is it. I go onto Netflix and it says, right, Roifield, yesterday you watched Captain America movie, you watched, I don't know, Spider-Man, and then the day before that you watched Batman versus Superman. I'm making this up.
Right.
So it says, this is what you should watch.
They got you figured out, Roifield.
Yeah. So all I'm going to do on that platform now is watch superhero movies. I have to make a conscious effort to get out of that.
Yeah, you're gonna get in a loop.
And that is what is happening with political thought, and more dangerous than that, the news. Whatever problems we had with the news pre the internet, pre talk cable, at least citizens of all stripes sat down around the communal campfire, which was the news at 6 o'clock or whatever the time it was, and we agreed that happened was important. We might take different things away from it, but we agreed that was important. That was fact.
And truth, a type of truth, right?
Yes, yeah. I'm saying, some people took away different things. So we could still vote left or right. We still had some people saying, no, there are deeper, more malevolent forces in the world or whatever, and don't just accept things as face value. But fundamentally, it was the commons. It brought us together, whether you were in Britain, Jamaica, China, India, America, just wherever, brought us together. Now that is gone. And the problem is the deep problem we're starting to see all over the world, where people just have it. When Kellyanne Conway said alternative facts, and though many people derided what she said, she was completely correct. I listen to this news outlet, and it confirms my own prejudices. It never challenges them. Right. It never challenges them. It never tells me anything which I'm uncomfortable with. Yeah. And my engagement is even deeper. And it goes on and on and on. So I literally cannot talk. I'm going to call him a friend. He's an acquaintance, but I want him to be a friend. There's a guy who is a Trump-supporting conspiracy theorist. He's a radio presenter, a guy called Stu Peters. He has a successful radio show. And we've spoken a couple of times. And we want to like each other. But he has a worldview which is so antithetical to mine. And he just says, dude, you're being brainwashed. And I say the same to him. Now, I believe...
How do you get out?
Well, this is the thing. And that's the reason why I've decided that I need to stop with a lot of my podcasts, just speaking to people that fundamentally kind of
is that right?
With me.
Is that right?
Yeah, I've kind of stopped. So my show, Mid-Atlantic, one of the things that I do is a politics show, I think called Mid-Atlantic. And we're now having right of center speakers on, because there is no point continuing with the liberal coziness that we actually have. We're preaching to the converted, and our liberal orthodoxy is not being stress tested at all. Well, it's intellectually very lazy. Also, societally, it's very bad what we're doing. So I went on Stu Peters' show, right? And I believe that's what we need to do.
You did it already? Oh, I wish.
I've been on. I'll give you the link. I think I did okay.
I struggle with this. There's a writer I love His name is Seraphim Rose. He's a philosopher. He was a monk. And by the way, he looks like a Rasta. Like many of the Orthodox monks look like Rasta. The Ethiopian monks are, I'm pretty sure they're borrowing from the same idea, but he's not of this world. He's trying to remove himself. And what he says is, and I'm interested in what you say about this. He says, as people stop having a center, call it a God, call it a good, there's a truth around which we have to circle. Once that sun goes inside, in other words, you are your own center, at that point, society has to break apart. And the conversations that you had with Drew, his name is Drew, they have to end the way you're feeling, which is in, well, okay, that's your facts, these are mine. And pretty soon what he says in his philosophy of life is, there's no way to hold the center because there's actually no center. And the only thing left is war. And this is Nietzsche, right? And this is him talking about you have to make your own meaning, and you're going to bump up against people who have different meaning. And like a good friend of mine, we call him Uncle Seth on this show, says, he goes, yeah, you just fight them. You're not going to convince them because there's actually nothing to convince them to. There's no center to move them toward because each of us makes our own center. And so in that case, like you and I'm not saying this is the case with you and I, but you and I would talk, and then we'd go back to our centers and get ready to fight. Does that sound too depressing?
It does. It sounds somewhat frightening. There's a lot in what you said, and there is something about, and I have to use my language here carefully, about deprogramming people's minds, because as any student of history will tell you, the Nazis, when they came into power in 1933 in Germany, didn't on day one say, right, we're going to round up all the Jews.
Right.
They didn't say that at all, right? They were anti-Semitic, but step by step, they had to put in place rules. It wasn't until Kristallnacht, which was going to be like 1937, then there was this overt policy of throwing bricks through Jewish shop windows and et cetera, et cetera. But you set the ground. So how people go down a radical road is step by step. So, and this is the debate which I'm having with a lot of my, and I'll say liberal, latte drinking, coastal friends.
I would love to hear about that. That's one of the things I'm really happy to have you on the show is we have old world, new world types. So you're one of our new world sort of spokespeople. In the States, it's left and right coasts.
Yeah.
And so tell us, what are they saying?
A lot of them will say that there's a new president. So if you just take the present situation in the United States, Biden is the new sheriff in town, and he's going to do good things. And they're somewhat surprised, considering he's somewhat of a moderate Democrat at best, how modestly radical he's been so far. He's making all the right noises. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. But what about those approximately 50% of Americans are Republicans? Not all Republicans are Trump supporters by any stretch of the imagination, but at least half of Republican voters are diehard Trumpists. But, my liberal latte drinking coastal elite friends will say, we need to just ignore them. I say, what do you do about them? They say, just ignore them, and I'm like, no, you can't do that, because you have this festering rump and they see themselves as being ignored. And that's the great thing about Trump. They were ignored no longer, right? It doesn't matter what the economic and political truth is, right? But they're festering away. So I'm like, you can't allow these people to fester. You need to engage. You utterly need to engage, because we all need to get around the communal campfire again. We don't all need to agree, but we need to get around that communal campfire again.
What's the fire? Like, what is the thing? Because everybody likes to be around a campfire because it's warm.
When I frame my argument, it's always around access to communal media, but it is much wider than that. Actually, What the fire is us all. And it's, you know, it's that whole thing where, you know, you're out in the cold and what keeps you warm is the warmth of other people.
Oh, that's
right.
Interesting.
That's the fire, right? That's the fire. And we need to recognize the fact that we can't leave significant people out. What in the American tradition, America managed to do was to leave out significant numbers of Americans out of that communal campfire. African Americans, Native Americans. Just for what it's worth, one thing that doesn't half annoy me, and I'm black, so I can say this. when black scholars and when black thinkers always say the original sin of America is slavery, no, it's not. The original sin of America is the raping, pillaging, and disenfranchisement of native peoples. That's the original sin. The second sin is slavery. And we need to recognize that. As black folks, we need to recognize that, and white folks need to recognize that, right? We're not the original sin. We're the second sin. It's still a sin, but we're second. We're second, because even black intellectual thinkers, black radicals, we forget and marginalize the native peoples. They've been decimated.
Oh, you feel that even in your own conversations with other black folks?
Oh, God, absolutely. The original sin of America isn't slavery. That's the second sin. You know,
one of the original sins of these thinkers who created the New World, Francis Bacon and all these scientists, is they actually devised a really bad science on race. Like, what is a black person? This is a very odd category for me. What's a white person?
This labeling thing can be problematic.
Oh, I just hate it. I'm not saying it doesn't real for you or for me, but we keep making it real. You remember that Public Enemy, the hater taught hate, now we're gang banging, from I forget which song it was in the 80s, but it's like we keep using this same really bad construct of race to make sense of ourselves. It just drives me nuts.
And the thing is, all of our constructs on racial identity, as I said earlier on in our conversation, are post 1500.
That's right.
And there was like, we existed as human beings before that. You go back and look at literature on people who, in Europe, who were non-white. It didn't say that they were automatically inferior. It didn't.
I agree.
It just said, oh, this person is a Moor. The expression Moor was covered a multitude of sins.
Yes.
You could be kind of Arabic or North African in appearance through to black, as we traditionally kind of understand the concept. But there was no, this person comes from a diseased, and it used a Trump expression, a shithole country. Yeah, that's from somewhere else. Yeah, there is a human being that kind of looked different. Our notions of identity and oppression and liberation are so wrapped up with the last 500 years. The Romans, bless them, were equal opportunity enslavers. They didn't enslave anybody. You could have white, blonde hair, blue eyes. You can be a slave.
You got conquered, you were a slave. That's the way it worked.
Yeah. Exactly. But then also the Romans were like, well, you can buy your way out of slavery. And also, it's not chattel slavery as we understand it. There was a bit of that. Don't get me wrong. There were people working in salt mines and stuff. But you could work in someone's household. You could become the family accountant. Yeah. You could go out into society, et cetera, et cetera. So, but anyway, slightly off the point. Notions of identity, we need to look further than the last 500 years backwards to understand them. What does black mean? I don't really know. It's one of those things which we know when we see it, but it's really hard actually to define.
Yeah, I agree.
And as somebody
that used to be the soul. That was, you knew it when you see it, but it was hard to define. Mm-hmm. That used to be a soul. Now it's a race.
It's one of the things which I find slightly problematic about American culture. And this is me coming at this from a British / Jamaican perspective. I forget what percentage of white Americans actually have African American blood. Just for the sake of argument, let's say it's 20%. I forget what, I used to know the figure, but I've forgotten the figure.
Mm-hmm.
And when white Americans discover that they have some African American blood, they're always shocked, because there's a great thing called ethnogenesis, which is we kind of construct our own ethnic past.
Saying. That's correct.
We construct it. We construct it. So, and it is a case in point. I've got a great friend of mine, a guy called Jared Kobeck. He is an author. He had a great book a few years ago called I Hate the Internet. It's always described in all the press as a Turkish American writer. All the press all over.
Does his head pop off when he reads that? Probably.
No. Well, he embraces it. He owns it. He owns it. He speaks Turkish to his father. I got a text from him in pure Turkish the other day. I went, dude, what the hell was that? And I meant that's my dad.
That's
right.
Funny.
So he grew up. I forget where he grew up. Let's say he grew up in LA. I don't think it was. I think he grew up somewhere in the East Coast. But whatever. He grew up in America. Is the case in point. Always described as a Turkish American writer. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I discovered his mother was Irish. And I went, you're an Irish American writer? And he went, no, I'm not.
No, really?
He says, I have no connection to that part of me. But actually, he's 50% Irish. He doesn't own it. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't celebrate St. Patrick's Day. That's ethnogenesis. He's created his own racial identity. He's completely ignored the one half. And that's what happens with a lot of white Americans, the 20% who have some African American blood, because at some point in the past, and we all know the stories, slave master has had sex with, has raped, a slave. She's had a child, and then that child, who was then a mulatto, half black, half white, mixed race, has been raped by another white. So you had in these southern towns, after slavery was abolished, people who literally was only 1%. They looked white, but the whole town knew that they had some level of black blood, so they were treated as black.
But it's utterly not scientific. It's just odd. It's the oddest form of categorization that I know of in the world.
Exactly. And then these people then realized that when slavery was abolished, we're only black in this town. If we go 100 miles up the road, or if we go out of state,
it's interesting.
Then we're not black anymore. We're not black. Right, we don't have the stain anymore. So they went and moved. And then, of course, when you then, you were black in Louisiana and you've moved to Missouri and nobody knows you, of course, you don't talk about the fact that you were black. You meet somebody, you make love, you have babies, you get married. That's gone. That's gone. So here we are in 2021, and 20% or whatever the figure is, of Americans who will class themselves as white, they do ancestry.com, whatever, and they go, what? African American? It's always a massive shock.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm the other way, where I don't know what my genetic makeup is, but having grown up around a lot of black folks and lived overseas and now married a black woman, my kids hate this, Roifield, but I'm black. I'm sorry. But I don't do this. I'm not doing this on this podcast. It's not real, because I really kind of I don't want to claim the racial categories that we use. But when I say that, you should see that my daughters roll their eyes. And they're right to roll their eyes. But at the same time, man, it's such a moving target. Historically and scientifically, it's such a moving target.
It is a moving target. And there is a guy in the UK, a comedian called the White Yardie. A Yardie is a Jamaican expression for somebody who's from yard, from home, a Jamaican.
Okay.
And prior to Jamaica becoming independent, and don't quote me on these figures, but let's say between 5 and 10% of the population of the island of Jamaica would have been white. So don't quote me exactly on those figures, but it was small but significant. We're not talking 1%. And since the independence of Jamaica, there's been white flight in the island of Jamaica. The motto, of the country is "Out of many, one people." The first few prime ministers were obviously not traditionally black when you look at them. So you had a guy called Buster Manty, Michael Manley, his father Norman Manley.
He was known as a black man, Michael Manley, or what was?
Well, no, Jamaicans would have said he's a Jamaican. Jamaicans are kind of Jamaicans from the bottom looking up, colorblind. Jamaicans from the top of society looking down, different thing. Different thing. But they would have said he's just a Jamaican.
Right.
Edward Seaga, famously in Jamaican terms, it's like the 4th or the 5th prime minister, had Syrian parents and was born on the boat coming to Jamaica when his parents were emigrating from Syria to Jamaica. So you have a whole load of there are a lot of Jamaicans who aren't of pure African stock or from African stock, full stop. So the white yardie, if you don't see this guy, he just sounds Jamaican, which is a synonym for black, but he's a white guy. I'm sure he would call himself black. In his heart, he's black. He identifies with the struggle of Jamaicans. He was born in Jamaica, but he's a white guy. He's authentically Jamaican. No Jamaican of any color is going to say you're not Jamaican. He sounds Jamaican when he speaks. He likes Jamaican food, culture, etc. But he can code switch. He can sound like he can sound like a typical English guy. But no black person in the United Kingdom would say that he's not one of us, whatever that means. I think that's a better way of saying it. Whether he calls himself black or not, but say that, but he is one of us. He gets us, we get him, etc., etc.
Hey, would you take a test with me to sort of wrap things up? It's called our lightometer test.
All right.
And thanks for coming on, by the way. We love you.
No, listen, thank you for having me on.
We'll take the test. Here's your first question. When you die, you won't really die like all the way. It's more like you'll be asleep or waiting for some next world of some sort. So 3 is, oh yeah, that's definitely true. 2, probably. 1, probably not. 0 is...
Repeat the question to me again. So I have strong feelings about what happens when I die, but just give me the question again so I've got it. So you can
when you die, Roifield, when you die, it's not, you don't, this doesn't have to apply to anybody else but you. But when you die, you really won't die all the way. It's more like you'll kind of fall asleep and be waiting for some type of next world.
I'm going to say, do I say 3 or 2 on that? And I'll give you my honest answer.
Sure.
Now, technically, honest answer is saying I'm going to give you a dishonest answer. I'll give you what I believe. Sorry.
Absolutely, that's all we got.
I'm technically a Buddhist, but do I believe I'm going to come back as another animal? No, and this is where the new and the old world for me meld together. We're all just children of stardust, atoms and molecules, and we go back into the earth. And then we reform as a multiplicity of other things. So I could be part tree, a bit of grass, a bit of a dog, a bit of a whatever, and blah, 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 blah. Sure. Right. And that's just the science. That's what happens to us. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say 3, but it's not in the classic sense that I'm going to wake up again and as a human being. Right. Yeah, exactly. Or Roifield Mark II, or, but I actually believe it's between a 2 and a 3, because my molecules, my atoms will become other things.
We'll give you a special guest rating of 2.5. We don't usually do that.
All right.
That's hot. We'll call it the English decimal. rating. So. All right. Now, second question.
The French rationalists will get really upset with that.
Yeah, they will.
They will claim that. But anyway.
They sure will. You're right, absolutely. So the best way to get to know you is to ask someone else about you. Or said another way, the best way to get to know me, Roifield, or me, is to ask someone else about me. Don't talk to me. Talk to someone else.
I'm going to get that slap bang in the middle. And I tell you the reason why. Because you introduced me by saying that I do a whole load of different podcast shows, and all of those things are incredibly important to me. But dependent on who you ask about me, you'll get, I don't say wildly different answers, but you'll get different answers as to who I am. So whatever the middle score is, give me that middle score. Because if you talk to my mother, she doesn't know me as a lover, let's say. Right. If you speak to somebody who I've dealt with to do with one the biggest podcast I do, this thing about the Archers, they don't necessarily know that I'm crazy about geopolitics.
So smack dab in the middle would be something like a 1.5. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So this one I find instructive. If you were to carry a picture around with someone, or if you carry a picture around of a friend or a parent or whatever, or you put a picture in your house, you're actually carrying that person or putting that person right there close to you in some kind of real way. The picture itself is bringing them close to you in a real way or not. 0 is like, no.
3 in a real way. And I'll be honest here, and this is a bit of a point of weakness for me. My youngest child, her and I haven't properly spoken for a little time. She lives in Canada, and she's going through some teenage angst. Love her dearly, and I deliberately keep her picture. Good heavens! And now it's kind of gone, but you can't quite see it on the back. Mm-hmm. But she's on my phone deliberately, so that I'm still close to her.
I got it. Beautiful. Here's your fourth one. Respect isn't earned; it's owed by you to others. So respect isn't earned; it's owed by you to others.
No, that I completely and utterly agree with. And that's what my father taught me without using those exact same words. And I think if we go back to one of the things I said in our conversation, I have no time for my liberal latte drinking friends that say we should ignore that 25 to 20% of Americans who believe the election was stolen. Mm-hmm. Just because we might believe that they don't respect us, but we should give them the respect of engaging with them. We don't agree with them, but we're going to engage with them. We want to pull them back into the body politic. We believe that dialogue and discourse. I believe that dialogue and discourse is incredibly important, because otherwise we just fracture as a community, as a society, etc.
Great, clear answer. Here's our last one, and I'll total them up. I'll tell you where you stand on our Lidometer exam. And this kind of has two parts because it depends on the person. But you hope and you expect to take care of your parents by having them live with you or very close in the same building with you as they get older and affirmed, or flip it. You expect to live with your kids when you get older and affirmed, and in their house and right in their grill as you get older and affirmed. 0, 1, 2, 3.
You're making me touch on some themes which are very prescient to me at the moment, John. Okay. So not many people know that my youngest child is, she's going through some stuff at the moment. It's not something which I tell some of my closest friends, So you managed to get that confessional out of me. And here's another one. So my father is 76, and he's declining. He was always an ox of a man, strong man. He went out and, he came to England when he was 15, 16. I think he came when he's 15. And, worked every day of his life,
Wow.
And there's no such thing as the British dream like there is the American dream, but he lived it. He came as an immigrant. And then by the time he retired, he owned like 3 houses. He was a bus driver. My father is declining physically. And because I spend so much time out of the country, I see it,
Oh, right. Because
because I don't see him from 9 months to the next year to 6 months. So I see it. And my father, I will say up until 5 years ago, was physically stronger than me. Yeah. Right. He always did manual, was a manual guy, bus driver and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, my point of mentioning all that is to say that as my parents are declining now, me being an international hobo doesn't sit that comfortably with me.
Okay.
And at the start of the pandemic last year, I went home to the UK and I was there for 6-7 months or so, which is the longest I've spent in the UK in forever. And it was because, back in March of 2020, we all thought the world was going to hell.
Yeah. And
you best be with your loved ones, or at least the ones who could look after themselves the least. So
you,
I think I'm
210.
No, I don't expect my children to look after me.
So
I don't at all. Am I expecting when my parents are in their complete and utter dotage? They're not there yet, but they're declining, especially my father. I expect, and when I go to the UK, I do live with them. I do live in the house. I'm in the middle on this one.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't at all expect my children to look after me. That's not going to happen.
So my analysis, so we have this little so your number is 11.5. And just having done this a number of times, you sound very old world. So here's what you aren't. You're not the shining city dweller on the hill. That's where you have hope for. You're all modern, all in, all science, all Reddit. You love Reddit. You love modern stuff. You think Columbus was a jerk, but also you really appreciate the new world philosophies that he brought over. So you're not really a new worlder. Here's your score: the villager. This is the old world way is in your bones. There's a really good chance places like Ethiopia will roll out the red carpet for you. Your Spotify collection includes some pretty old world stuff that may be very hard to pronounce. And you kind of, you like hierarchy, but you're not that good at obeying it. That's what you got out of your 11.5.
You know what? I wouldn't disagree with that. And
Good, we'll take it.
I'm a big lefty, but I'll let you into another little secret. I'm an emotional monarchist. So that's that whole hierarchy thing, right? I don't believe in the divine right of kings, because that's just utterly nonsense. But there's something quite nice and comforting about having somebody with a shiny hat on their head who is symbolically that we all look to, we're all a people together, and we all look to them, to her, to him as the person that, makes us feel better when we fall over.
Yeah.
So my policy is completely not left of center, but I understand the power of symbolic continuity by having somebody with a shiny hat on their head. So yeah, I think that's perfect.
Symbolic continuity is a great phrase. We'll take that up next time. So we've been out a while, man. I'm actually gonna.
I enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed it. I woke you up out of bed, but I think it worked out. I think it really worked out.
You know what? It did, and I'm glad you did.
Thank you, man. Have a great day out in San Francisco.
And you, man. Look after that family of yours.
I will. They're out and about, so we'll see what happens. Cheers, brother.
Take care, John. Bye-bye.
Shenis Gagi Marjos to Mr. Roifield Brown for coming on. If Shenis Gagimarjos means, to you, Roifield Brown, the victory. We wish you the best. It's said at the KP table in Georgia. WAWTAR is produced by Andrew Schwark and Daniel Paternos. The pod is brought to you by First Things Foundation. That's our nonprofit. It's filled with people who show up to go and do 2 years worth of service, where they immerse long-term in some pretty tough neighborhoods in order to serve people there and their best vision for a best life. So, share WAWTAR with friends, hit us up with good reviews, and do the thing we need you to do, which is get to know us, support us, because we're really trying to change the way service looks. Service is about, right, becoming one with whom you serve and to whom you serve. Nakvam dis, hasta luego, con bufo, and peace out.